Thank you, moderators. Thank you, ICAP, for the invitation. It's hard to follow, these wonderful speakers, but I'll try my best. Let me try and, share my screen. Guys, let me know if you guys can see my screen.
Yes. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks for the introduction also. Briefly speaking about my last 10 to 15 years, I've been in the US since 2008. And I came right in the midst of the financial crisis. Did survive that, both in public accounting as well as worked at GE during that tenure. But then we saw another phase where the growth in technology sector did disrupt the brick and mortar companies. The growth of e-commerce had pervasive impact to many businesses. And then the last few years, we have all seen the impact what COVID had, the US, globally, and many economies. So I would like to share some of the thoughts that, personally I have experienced over time, and hopefully that'll be, helpful for the audience. So I think it is important that we understand that in the recent past, complex political issues, geopolitical issues have impacted the global economies in many ways. We have seen COVID and the impact it had on inflation, cost of capital, supply chain disruption, foreign currencies. The other new thing that the world has seen, especially that was true in the US, part of Europe and Asia, is an era of great resignation, where a significant portion of the workforce voluntarily resigned, or they were considering resigning in pursuit of better work-life balance, higher job satisfaction. Some of that was also driven by ESG factors, and particularly the social aspect that we have seen over the last couple of years, very active in the US part of the world, but also true in many other parts of the world. I think it is important to have this context that in which environment we are in right now, because each crisis is unique in its own ways. So you have to be able to understand how to respond to that crisis in that unique fashion also. Nevertheless, whenever you are in any economic crisis or downturn, making businesses recession resilient requires multiple levels. Some of the traditional ones like cost management, how do you think about innovation, how do you go after the growth, and that could change. But talent is also a key part of this strategy. And it is proven, there are many studies out there that now proves that a resilient workforce does play a part in making organizations resilient and help them to weather through many economic challenges. And this is where many organizations sometimes underestimate the role that an inspired workforce can bring to the equation. And that's where it is extremely important that organization leaders, they focus on how to boost employee confidence and how to think about the efficiency and retention. I know in a couple of panel discussions, Saqib talked about, how the emerging skill set is impacting the workforce, their desire to get into a new job, data science, data analytics. Accountants now are required to do more than ever they did. It's no longer sort of number crunching, number assessment exercise. You have to provide insight back to the business. The understanding data, the value of data, how to govern that becomes extremely important. Like at the end of the day, what we're trying to get to is that a resilient, motivated workforce does outperform an organization that does not focus on that. And there are definitely proven studies there. So before I go to sort of my next slide, there are a couple of polling questions. It'll be very interesting to see like how you guys think about it. We'll give 30 seconds to the audience. Tell me if we should move to the next slide or not. Yeah. So very interesting. So this was a study performed in 2021 by a few research institutes, and they looked at multiple factors. But the top three factors why workforce resign in the era of Great Resignation uh, was the top three that I listed. Pay was too low, no opportunities to advance in the company, and they felt disrespected at workplace. Now, all other factors listed are still like pretty significant. You could see that almost it's close to half of the population. So it does tell us that there are multitude of reasons why workforce considered switching jobs. And that's where it is important for each organization to pay attention to understand what is the pulse, what are the dynamics, and take actions, accordingly. Let me go to my next polling questions. While we wait for the results, this was pretty interesting to me. You will see what is the magnitude of this and how important certain aspects in the organization are. Okay. So based on the study that MIT performed, the top predictors for attrition was the toxic corporate culture. And it's 10 times higher than the usual factors. And as you can compare and contrast that, it's 3 times higher roughly to any other factor listed. Job insecurity, higher level of innovation, especially when people are looking for stable jobs. They don't necessarily always want to be in the midst of innovation, which is pretty interesting. And then failure to recognize employee performance. So I think this is what I've personally seen in many companies when I have built teams and interviewed people when they exit the organization. Often corporate culture becomes the #1 reason why people join companies. Also, is the prime reason why people leave job they love and they know, and they switch the companies, and corporate culture continues to remain one of the top factors. So what should we do? The goal is to boost the morale, enhance the productivity, inspire the workforce. So what are some of the common strategies that we can all consider? And it's not all inclusive. It's just some of the things that I thought were important, which I have seen personally. In a diversity, equity, inclusion, this is something that in the last couple of years has been the conversation far more than ever. And it is an important factor for organizations to pay attention to, because it is, again, proven by studies that a diverse workforce, an environment that is D&I enabled, significantly outperforms competition. So what's the core principle of this? At the heart of it, it's about implementing practices that treat workforce with respect. And not taking into account their age, race, color, language, their personal choices, giving everyone the equal level of respect. I think that is extremely important. It mobilizes workforce, It gives them confidence that they can be authentic, they can be themselves in any workplace, and that plays into innovation, that plays into just bringing energy every day, and that rubs on others as well. Um, it is also a very strong retention tool. And one thing that I would like to emphasize, and I cannot overemphasize on this, it is a choice. We all have a choice to follow this and be very intentional about it. In some of the organizations that I've worked, especially in the last 3 years or so, D&I practices are embedded in the hiring process and hiring decision. For example, in one of the companies that I work, at certain leadership roles, you have to first make sure that your talent pool for the interview process is D&I compliant. Means you have all kind of representation in that pool before you even commence the process. It's painful sometimes. You have to wait for a couple of months to make sure that the pool is there. But in the long run, it does pay dividends back to the organization. So I think it's about being intentional. The other thing that I have been noticing in many of the talent review and performance reviews over the last couple of years is a very active conversation, dialogue about overcoming bias in the process. The talent team, people team, they are now very much interested in challenging managers, leaders on, hey, how you are assessing the performance of this individual. Are there any sort of biases that you're bringing to the equation? And that's extremely important. The more voices in the room that is talking for you, advocating for you as an individual, the better the outcome is. So it's no longer dependent on one particular person who's your manager or your leader to drive your career advancement. I think the organizations are taking a combined responsibility, and that's great. The other thing that is important is some of us, historically, maybe myself as well, we did not fully understand the significance that D&I can impact, or the practices can bring to the organization. So education is a key part of this process. Okay, make sure my slides are working okay. The other thing that is extremely important, especially the last couple of years, is how organizations enable work environment flexibility. We all have seen that COVID pandemic has accelerated the remote work arrangement. Workers are now demanding new and flexible workplace arrangements. In one of the companies that I previously worked, people demanded to work from other countries outside of their home countries. It brings additional operational challenge, tax complexities for the organization. But people were willing to jump the ship and work for companies who are offering those kind of benefits. I think that's where it's important that what as an organization you can do to enable that. Employees are generally also reluctant to return to office for the full work week. And that continues to be a challenge for many organizations. And I think the biggest challenge of that is that how do you develop a consistent organizational culture, especially when you have hired and build new teams. People haven't necessarily spend time together, build the trust. So it's important that we as an organization find practices and policies that is centered around flexibility. We have to look at the personalization aspect of the employee. Having said that, it is also important to have clear expectations and roles and responsibilities. For example, what kind of role cannot be fully remote? What kind of role, for example, innovation-based role, collaboration-based role continues to be roles where leaders and organizations expect employees to be in office as much as they can, or find opportunities to connect more frequently if you're even a remote employee. So I'll go to my third polling question. Yeah, irrespective of what is the answer here, I think you can see that a significant chunk of the workforce prefers hybrid work model. Um, in both my current company and previous company, when we talk to our employee base, more than 80% of the people in those organizations wanted a hybrid model, not a full remote work experience. The debate was, what is that model? Okay, interesting to see. I think you guys got like pretty much close to how we are seeing on an overall basis. Um, this is based on recent survey, what workforce is preferring from a hybrid work model. 54% of the workforce, almost half of it, do expect to both come in office as well as work remotely and find that personal balance in life. The other strategy, which I think it remains true in every scenario, but it's more important now than ever, that as you think about investment in the future, you have less access to capital, and how do you create a competitive advantage? It's through investment in people, development, and career advancement. I know Mr. Mohammad Aurangzeb talked about innovation in people, process, technology. I think this is where it is relevant. In my own personal experience, having lived through a few crises, the financial crisis, the brick and mortar debacle, recently also, especially in the tech sector, layoff that has happened. Often organizations follow like a broad brush approach to manage talent. My personal view is that a cookie cutter approach often leads to uh, ignore or overlook key talent. When you apply strategies like, all right, like let's just eliminate a particular team, or let's just look at certain levels and tenures and eliminate those teams and not invest in those, you're often going to lose talent that can be very valuable to the organization. Most workers, they want to improve, and they have growth goals, they have growth mindset. Um, so the responsibility is on both sides. Individually, we all have to invest in ourselves, but I also think that organizations need to develop plans, how to educate, how to upskill the talent and to improve their productivity, but more importantly, retention. And you'll see in one of the polling question why retention is extremely important, even from sort of a cost perspective. Uh, Developing formal education plan is extremely important, and many organizations in the US market, and definitely they do that. Some do better job than others, but it is, given how skill set is evolving and changing for accountants. For example, in my previous company, I had a dedicated team of 15 plus doing data science applications on accounting judgments and estimates, very new innovative areas. But we had built that muscle through a strategy where we did hire people from external, but made a requirement to upscale the internal team members, because that's the long-term sustainable model. You can't go and replace your entire workforce with new workforce with new skills and competence. What is also important, I think, is developing an individualized career path and having a mentorship program. I think these are great tools to deploy on an everyday basis, working with your workforce. I think I'm challenged with moving my slide. Give me a second. Yeah, the other tool, all of us love that, the reward and recognition in a piece of that. Despite all the economic challenges in the recent past, impact of COVID, and also the layoffs in tech sector that we have recently seen, the labor market remains vibrant. I think Akif was talking about it, that not everyone is looking to go back to work again in the US market. I was looking at some study where for each person who's looking for a job, there are like more than 1.6 jobs available in the marketplace. So the competition is stiff in the current labor market. So companies need to develop attractive and equitable compensation plan and benefit packages. People are giving more value to intangibles, such as paid leaves, mental health programs, um, access to education, as a distinguishing factor. Flexibility we talked about. So thinking about reward and recognition holistically is important. It's no longer just how much cash I'm getting, how much bonus I'm getting, what I'm taking home. It's the quality of life that is also important. Organization can look to create certain metrics in that respect to see how they're progressing. Transparency is good. In my current company and last company, we shared with employees the market ratio, the target percentile of the compensation. And it gives a reference point to employees that how they're tracking against others in the market. The other thing that is also extremely important, given that the work-life balance sometimes can get skewed towards one way versus the other, how do we take care of an employee well-being, and how do we stay transparent? Employee value environment all the time when they see a full support around their physical, mental, and emotional health. They love to have social opportunities, which drives engagement, and it eventually helps to build trust. And trust is foundation to a lot of things we do in life. What's also important to pay attention that I previously mentioned that every workforce is unique. They have distinct goals, needs, and personal goals. So it's important to calibrate for that. And being open and listening to employees is more important than ever. Employees are vocal now. We talked about the ESG aspect earlier, especially on the social side. People are no longer married to one organization. They join the company and they retire after 25 years, they get a pension. That's not what they're looking for now. They are willing to look on both sides and say what we are getting out of this relationship from an employer-employee, and it has to be beyond just financial reasons. Other thing that is extremely important, I think in this time is having a good sense of what's happening on the ground. The Pulse survey, obtain feedback, but more importantly, take corrective actions. I cannot tell you how many times I have found frustrated employees that, okay, all the surveys and the pulse checks have been done. We have all the data. We can see what's not working. We did do discuss as an organization, but then there is no corrective action, no follow through. And that's where employees lose trust in management and leadership. One last polling question, and then hopefully I can have some closing remarks. This is where I was earlier referencing that why it is important to have a high retention rate. I think over the last few years, a lot of industries and companies have seen high turnover ratio, which I think in 2021 was in many organizations double the prior year rate. Yeah, that's interesting. I think 3 to 6 months is a good guess, but I think we'll be a little surprised that the actual study says is 6 to 9 months of the salary. This is what it takes to an organization when you're replacing a key talent or any talent. So it's pretty significant. I'm sure like in certain cases it's less than 6 months. This is a broad average. And this is eye-opening. Taking care of employees, often we lose talent for, hey, we didn't give them enough increment, or we didn't take care of a personal need. And it costs organization tremendously, and especially in the era of great resignation, when this happened at scale, it was a huge challenge for many companies. So, key takeaways, I think we have all learned that the recent events have profoundly impacted the workforce management and how organizations should approach, that. Invest not only on current but future workforce. Key examples could be build curriculums, and I've been personally involved in some of those curriculum development and giving roadmaps to internal workforce how they can upskill and do more fun and interesting things and get out of the mundane kind of job. No hidden secret anymore. Proven studies that a motivated, engaged workforce will create competitive advantage, and not only will help organizations to survive, but can enable organizations to grow during this economic downturn. And with that said, I would give the floor back to the moderators and to the next speaker. Thank you, everyone.